But we were just talking about these really interesting rivalry games we're going to see this weekend. Let's talk some real football. Let's transition into our stock up, stock down segment, where we are still learning about these teams. We still only have 2 weeks of data, but Joshua, through 2 weeks, the Texas Longhorns, man, they look like a national title contender.
They are fantastic. And I've been so trepidatious about like going all in on Texas because they just haven't been able to get right. And I think last year was the point where it's like, okay, there is confidence. They made it to 14 playoff. Like it's a program that we've all wanted them to be. They just hadn't been. And you play Michigan coming off a national title, certainly a different Michigan team than they were last year. Texas beat them badly, right? Like they controlled that game from the very beginning. And I like what Steve Sarkisian did offensively. Certainly, we look at him as one of the great offensive minds. He created any matchup that he wanted to against this Michigan defense that I do think is extremely talented. Wink Martindale, very veteran coordinator. Like it wasn't an easy task for him to do that. And defensively, they shut down the Michigan offense has been anemic. But the thing that became apparent to me throughout that game, in the lead up, a lot of analysts were talking about Michigan. You know, they can grind it out, and like Texas is good, but do they have it up front? Can they match the toughness? Texas started to play Michigan's game and took that to them. That's the biggest thing that stood out to me. And we know in the SEC, it's big boy ball. I think they're prepared for it, but that was an eye-opening performance from the Longhorns.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now, coming out of week 2 into week 3, there are 3 teams that I put in that national championship caliber level, right? In that upper echelon. You've got Georgia, you've got Ohio State, and now you've got Texas. I think Oregon has some work to do. We've talked about this on air. We've talked about it on this podcast, like some real concerns with that offensive line, with how Dylan Gabriel is kind of like meshing into his new team. They got some work to do. I think they can do it, but right now they're not in that grouping. There's 3 teams, and it's because you've got a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. You're good in the trenches on both sides, and they've got just incredible skill talent. So they've lost running backs. They've had some injuries in the lead up to the season. It hasn't looked like it affected them much, JP.
The running back one is a really interesting point. I'm glad you took it there because that was one of the biggest questions. Like, we know you can throw the ball, but can you have balance to your offense? And their line did a great job of opening up some seams so they could run the ball effectively. But I also love the way that they utilize running backs in the pass game. And I talked about creating matchups with Sark. They isolated the Michigan linebackers in a lot of situations where there was a ton of space for the running backs. And playing linebacker, it's a difficult spot to be in. Like, you've got to make an open field tackle one-on-one. And a lot of times, like, you're at a disadvantage in that situation. And so the scheme at that point can kind of overcome some of the personnel difficulties when you got a guy like Sark. And I think that's a really big point here is even with a thinner running back room, they found answers to keep this offense going.
Absolutely. And again, you look at their schedule, we know that the top teams can lose a game. They're still going to be fine. It's 12-team college football playoff. So you got to feel really good about the Longhorns not making last year a fluke. They are building off of what they have. They are going to be a national championship contender. Here's a team that I don't know if we talked about as like a CFP contender as much as we probably should have. They've looked really good. They had a really emphatic win over NC State, a team that's supposed to be pretty good in the ACC. They absolutely crushed them 51-10. And that's the Tennessee Volunteers. Nico Iamaleava is so good that we've all had to practice pronouncing his name this past week because we got to say it because he could stay in the Heisman conversation. Like, this is an offense with Josh Heupel that is a Josh Heupel offense. This is what Hendon Hooker looked like in this offense, not Joe Milton. This is a team that is really sound. I think really good defensively. That was something we weren't really focused on until what we saw against NC State. But I mean, I feel like we're starting to believe in Tennessee, and looking at that schedule feels fairly manageable. I mean, I think this is a team that's going to be in the mix here, kind of in that maybe second tier in the SEC.
All right, let me get my practice in. Iamaleava?
No, Iamaleava.
Iamaleava. All right.
There you go.
So I'm gonna just call him Big Nico for the sake.
Yeah, we could just say Nico. Nico's a great
his
like
last name.
Yeah, easy.
He is fantastic. We expected him to be able to spin the rock. I think where he's been really good is the chances to run the football, right? And like looking at the last couple of Tennessee quarterbacks, Joe Milton was more of the pocket passer type. Hendon Hooker, I love the way that he threw the football. But like now you're looking at a guy who's got real juice with his legs. And again, coming from a defensive standpoint, it's much harder when you have to account for the quarterback or when you can't just put your best pass rush move because you know the quarterback can escape the pocket. And so he's given them a really good layer with his ability to do that. But the thing that you mentioned that I think is the big thing that people need to watch out for, and Josh Heupel was emphatic about this when he talked about his team after that win against NC State. He said, we are a program that values defense. We want to play great defense. Like that is the standard for Tennessee football. It hadn't been the standard. Right? Like if we're being completely honest, the standard was our offense is going to run up the scoreboard and we'll be able to figure out how to get enough stops to be able to win. Not full Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch, but it was pretty damn close when you start to boil it down. And now they're like, no, like we have put together a defense we feel really good about. And the defense is what's going to make them more competitive this year, if that's what the case is going to be. And so I love that. And now we're starting to really feel what a Josh Heupel program actually looks like. Not a Josh Heupel offensive team, a Josh Heupel program where you have a defense that can come to play. And I love that.
Our last team for stock up, it's the obvious team that has a stock up. We've been talking about them all week. They were the story last Saturday, and it's NIU. Northern Illinois pulls off the upset of Notre Dame in South Bend, the very first top 10 win for a MAC team. They win 16-10, 16-14. The nation falls in love with Thomas Hammock. I mean, incredible interview with Zora Stevenson on the field. And then he's got on a media blitz all week. We've learned so much about NIU. And we learned about this during the broadcast, but this is such a cool tradition for when Northern Illinois beats a Power 5 team. This is what they do. Major programs, I guess is how they've defined it because it's different eras before the Power 5 era. They keep a bone. This is the boneyard. These are the teams that they have taken down over the years. And listen, Notre Dame is joining the boneyard. This is their collection because they have been known to pull off upsets over the history of their program, but still nothing quite like what they did against Notre Dame.
No, it was impressive for sure. And Thomas Hammock, as you mentioned, right, like he's the story that I think a lot of people love about college football. He's a guy who played for that program. He wants to be there. He knows he's coaching an underdog when he's in these big games. And you could tell not only from his emotion in that post game, but like also the contrast between that level of emotion and the calm demeanor that he had on the sidelines all game long, that it meant that much to him. Like he called the risky plays when it was necessary. Yep. He had a really good game plan. Then he put his players in a really good spot. But just the idea of going to your alma mater and being able to, and he's talked about it, right? Like he wants to elevate. He knows what kind of a place it is, but he wants people to recognize Northern Illinois football. They're certainly getting the recognition right now.
Okay, so we've been texting about this, but I want to get your actual thoughts. So he has said that he offered to Marcus Freeman, like, yes, hey, here's how we beat you. Like, here are your weaknesses. Do you want to chat? And Marcus said yes. Mm-hmm. That's so interesting to me. I mean, maybe this happens more often than we hear about, but what do you make of that dynamic?
Well, I know that a lot of coaches on Sundays, they'll have calls and they'll call friends in the industry of opponents that they're getting ready to play, teams that they've played in the past, to do self-scout like that. I do think it's rare that you would get a situation where a coach calls you and just offers up information. And in particular, it feels real weird when it's Northern Illinois, like, hey, you want to know the keys to victory? Like, here's the playbook to beat you guys. Like, it's definitely tough. Marcus Freeman 100% has to take that call, and he should take that information. It's a great thing to know. I also think, just to extrapolate this out into a bigger picture, the coaching fraternity is really small, and these guys all know each other. And there are certainly rivalries, and I love the pettiness that comes with some of it. But a lot of these guys, professionally, they respect one another, and they want to be in a place where they get along. I think in particular for Black coaches, it's a bigger deal because it's almost like people will use anything that happens as an indictment on or as like the rule for these coaches. And so I think for Thomas Hammock, he's like, here's Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, certainly a great job. The guy has not been a head coach for very long. How can I help him along his path and be almost a mentor in that situation? So from that perspective, I see the big picture and I love it too.
Yeah, and like he knows he's in a tough spot now at Notre Dame because he's had losses like this. Plus, I mean, again, we're early in the season. We've been talking about the playoff because it's going to be a different world with a 12-team playoff. But if you are in Northern Illinois and now the door is open to get there, you want Notre Dame to win games. You know, like
they're sitting in that spot right now. You know,
right.
It's like Notre Dame, do your job.
Yeah, now you're rooting. Now you root for Notre Dame the rest of the way. That's how this works. It's a fun sport in that way.